So the first thing I want you to think about with structuring philosophy essays is to appreciate the model that philosophers have in mind. When we think about philosophy essays, we're actually thinking about academic journal articles, right? So the question we ask ourselves about a student philosophy essay is, how close does it come to meeting the standards that we set ourselves when we write for each other in philosophy journals? So I've got on the slide here, I've got a few examples. I brought up Analysis particularly because Analysis is a journal that specializes in short, clear articles. I mean, there are some academic articles that go on and on. Analysis is a journal that specializes in the short ones. Now, a lot of this stuff is paywalled, but a lot of it isn't. There's increasing amounts of free-to-air academic writing, and if you're serious about getting good at this, then you need to have a look at some of this stuff. It's as if, if you're a music student, as well as, practicing repertoire at your own level, you would be listening to virtuoso performances. You would be listening to the top players in whatever instrument you're playing, so that you'd know what you're aiming at. So you'd know what excellence looks like in that activity. Academics is the same. You should have some idea what the good stuff is like, what the professional stuff is like. Let me put it that way. Now, as I say, a lot of this stuff is paywalled, but they always show you the title and the abstract. And that's important for a reason that I'll get to later on. So that's the first thought. And like I say, even the stuff that's paywalled, they will give you the abstracts. And you want to spend a bit of time just exploring that. Just thrash about in the world of online philosophy academic journals and just read a few abstracts and see what they're like. Okay, so that's first piece of advice, is to get a sense of what the professional performances are like in the genre that you're moving into, starting to write in. Right. Okay, so let me move to some more practical things. Here's a question for you. How many points should an essay make? You may think, but wait a minute, to write an essay, don't I need to have make loads of points? Well, yes, but there should be one big point, right? If you're writing an essay that's I don't know, 1,300 words, 1,500 words, even a 2,000 or 2,500 word essay, really, you should be making precisely 1 point, and everything else that you say should be somehow supportive of your main point. If you try and say two things or more, then it's going to be confusing. You're going to be riding more than one horse at a time. Okay, so what is your one essay going to look like? Well, if you go on the internet and you go to your search engine and you look at essay structure or argument structure, argument structure is better, you will see lots of diagrams that look like this. The words may be different, right? So I've written, the premise is reasons, lemma is a slightly rather posh word borrowed from mathematics. But they'll all have this kind of shape where you've got lots of premises and some process of argument, and then that gets you eventually through to a single conclusion. So that's what the ideal looks like. But of course, when you're doing your research, when you're building your essay, you're probably looking at something more like this, right? So you've got a question that you have to answer, and what have you got? What have you got on your desk? Well, you've got some starting points, some premises and stuff, and maybe some bits of argument. One of the things about philosophy is that it does give you permission to play with wild ideas. The danger of that is that maybe there's a wild idea, some cool, thing, some thought experiment. You thought, oh, that's great, that you can see out of the corner of your eye that actually you'd quite like to write about, but it's not relevant to this essay, but it's kind of there. And maybe you've got several conclusions in mind, but only one of them is reasonable. So if that's the situation you're in, then your worry is, how do you get from that to this? Well, that's a solvable problem, but actually your situation is... Oh, and notice there's the gut reaction. The gut reaction. So you read some of this, your philosophy question, and in addition to knowing stuff and being aware of arguments that connect one bit with another, you've also got some feelings about it, right? And maybe your feelings connected with some desperate logical move, maybe they jointly point to an unreasonable conclusion, right? Except that's not really the situation for you, is it? This is already an idealization, because really your situation is like this. The desperate move hasn't been labeled as a desperate move. The premises, the partial conclusions haven't been... which conclusion is reasonable and which one isn't, you may not know. You probably can recognize your gut reaction as a gut reaction, so I've left the label on that. The cool idea, you're attracted to it. So it's a cool idea because it's kind of drawing you. Right? It's siren song is, write about me, write about me. If this is your situation, then actually things are more difficult, aren't they? But really, it may be worse than that. Actually, you may be looking at something more like this, where you've actually got some just little bits of argument. You haven't even got big connections. You've got something that leads to something else. Maybe this is going to be this stuff top left, where you've got something that leads to something else. Maybe that's going to be the core of your essay, because after all, you've got an argument to go. But then maybe it's this. Maybe these arrows are the ones that are going to turn into the core of your essay. And the cool idea is still there. So this is the real challenge, right? If you've done some research, you've kind of got a gut reaction, but you aren't yet sure what to do. Well, what very often happens, and I can. I've been a full-time philosophy lecturer in various universities for 30 years. Actually, I'm coming up to my 30-year anniversary. So I've read a lot of undergraduate essays, and one of the most common structures people end up with is this, right? You start here, but this isn't an essay. You know that you've got to pick a conclusion, and you've got to have argument. So what do? You do more book work, right? You throw yourself into the reading. You spend hours in the library. You put the time in. You go over the lectures. Maybe you find some stuff on YouTube, right? There's this, every academic in the world during lockdown had to make video lectures, and we all put our video lectures on YouTube because, might be cool to be famous. So as you know, I'm telling you this like you don't know it, right? There's masses and masses of stuff on YouTube. So you watch some of that. What do? You make notes. And maybe you color code them, right? Because you want to be organized. And your reading gives you some standard views of the matter. So you do all this book work, but you still have to pick a conclusion. At this point, you listen to your gut. At this point, your feelings about the subject, about the question, kind of break through. And it's your gut reaction that supplies you with an answer, right? Is Kant right to think that we should never tell a lie? Write an essay on that. Off you go. So you do all this, immerse yourself in writing about Kant. You might even read Kant, right? You ought to read Kant. But then you need to have an answer. So what do? Well, you just think, well, I just kind of know from my own life experience, my gut tells me that there are times when you ought to tell a lie. It's easy to think of examples. So you get this essay that is a kind of, comes in two parts. Like, let's say it's a 4-page essay. You get 3.5 pages of bookwork, comparing and contrasted. Good stuff with footnotes, right? Like nice academic work, which just doesn't reach a conclusion. And then halfway down the 3rd page, the author of this essay will think, oh, I really ought to have a conclusion. So at that point, and you can draw a line that suddenly the bookwork stops and the gut reaction takes over. And that's where the conclusion comes from. And you read this and you think, well, thank you for reaching a conclusion. That is a better essay than if you hadn't. But all of that work on pages 1, 2, 3, and the first part of page 4, all of that good academic stuff you did isn't contributing to your answer, right? So what happened? So that's one kind of essay you don't want to write. Yeah? If you find that you've written one of these, what do you have to do? Well, you have to think, okay, I now know what my preferred answer is. I now know what I feel about this. So what you then have to do is rewrite the first 3.5 pages so that all of that academic work heads towards, pushes towards, makes some contribution towards reaching your preferred answer, so that you then turn this thing that you're looking at now, 3.5 pages of book work and then half a page of gut reaction, you then turn that into one of these, right? Your gut has told you that you want this conclusion. Now you can retune, you can reverse engineer all this stuff so that it turns into an argument that's arguing for the conclusion you want from the beginning. Now, of course, your gut can't have sole charge of your philosophical life, right? So there has to be a kind of cycle, a kind of exchange between what you want to say and what you feel you're able to say logically, right? So you have to kind of walk between those two until eventually they make sense, until eventually they're in sync. Sometimes you get strange effects in student writing where the tension between what the student wants to say in their essay and what they feel able to say is just hasn't been reconciled. So my favorite example is a student wrote, Descartes is slightly extreme. Descartes is slightly extreme. How can you be slightly extreme? Well, of course you can't. But what had happened? This student clearly felt that Descartes is some sort of extremist. but didn't feel able to just say Descartes is an extremist. So what they'd done is they had kind of hedged it. They'd said as much as they felt able to say, but the hedging had kind of worked its way into the essay itself. So you get Descartes is slightly extreme. That's as much as I feel entitled to say, right? So yeah, you need to move between what you feel you've got a good argument, what you feel you want to say. Like if you weren't constrained by standards of argumentation, what would you say? And then there's what you feel you're able to argue for, and you work between those two until eventually they meet in the middle. That's how you get this thing. All of that is assuming that you have a gut reaction that will guide you. What if you don't? Right? What if your guts aren't telling you anything about the philosophical question that you've been asked? So you're then stuck with this. Well, if you're not careful, or if you're pressed for time, if you've if you're one of those people who persuade themselves that the best way to write an essay is to leave it till the last minute and then just blast it, right? Then if this is your situation where you've got plenty of book work, reading, notes, lecture notes, more reading and stuff off YouTube, but you haven't got any kind of intuitions, any feelings that will help you to get you there, what are you likely to do? Well, you're likely to end up doing this. This is the other strong attractor for weak essays. And this is the journalist's report on a controversy, right? So you go through all this, all of your reading and notes and stuff, and you make a list of points for whatever it is. Deontological ethics, functionalism in philosophy of mind, whatever the existence of God, whatever the question is. You make points for, and you make another list of points against, and that feels like systematic objective work, and it is, but the trouble is you end up with a non-committal answer. You end up doing journalism rather than philosophy. You end up saying, well, this party says these points, that party says those points. I don't say anything. I'm just reporting on this, right? So you end up like this. You end up, here's Evan Davis, journalist, mediating. He's got two talking heads. I don't know what they were arguing about. So obviously something to do with Wales. But he isn't committed, and he isn't going to give us the answer, right? So if you end up doing this, then you're not doing philosophy anymore. You're doing journalism. Incidentally, this is also the kind of answer you get from AI, like the large language model chatbots that offer to write essays for you. This is the kind of thing, because certainly the most popular one doesn't like to commit itself. So it tends to give you this kind of thing. This will not score you, at least at university. I mean, A-levels, different kind of story maybe. Listen to your teachers about A-levels. But at university, this will not score you the highest marks. Why? Because it, to answer a university level philosophy essay, you have to make a philosophical commitment. So what you got to do is you got to develop within yourself some feelings about the question, and the most reliable way to do that is to ask yourself, well, why does anybody care about this, right? Why? There's Descartes writing about the nature of the mind. He's busy inventing dualism. He convinces himself that, I am essentially a thing that thinks, and my body is a kind of separate story. Okay, I mean, you can follow his argument through, but why does he care? Why would somebody get up in the morning and write Descartes' Meditations? I mean, actually, with Meditations is a fairly short text, so it's not so weird. But if you think about Kant, here's Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. I mean, I think that's about 1.5 inches thick, at least. Why did he care? So if you this is where the kind of biographical information about the philosophers you're studying becomes useful to you. Not just that it's kind of interesting that it humanizes, but it also, their motivations can become your motivation. Right? Okay, so you need to get some feelings into this. Otherwise you won't be able to direct your essay. Your essay will be kind of aimless, and you'll end up doing one of these. All right, so that's a couple of examples of the essay not to write. Right? You don't want to do this, and you don't want to do one of those. They're kind of the opposite ends on this person. For this one, the gut reaction does all the work. For this one, there's no the intuitions are silent. Okay. But so far, I've been talking about this as if you just get a question like, is functionalism in the philosophy of mind true? But as you know, a lot of the time in studying philosophy, you're not so much answering the questions as questioning the answers. A lot of the time, you are busy reading the canonical texts by canonical philosophers and asking how good their arguments are. Do their arguments really work? And to help you think about that, I want to offer you my ferreting analogy, right? And the point of this analogy is to help you out if you've got feedback on your essays where the feedback is you need to develop this point. Well, what do you do? I mean, you just say it again? Say it in different words? What does that even mean, develop this point? Well, you need to use the fact, you need to be sensitive to the fact that no interesting theory is ever defeated, is ever refuted by a single point. There always has to be some prior work. There has to be some groundwork before you can deliver your killing blow. So, for example, I mean, I happen to think that the existence of pointless suffering in the world is fatal to theism, right? But I can't just say that, right? I can't just say, well, look, come on, if there's a God with all the omnis, there really shouldn't be any pointless suffering, should there? But there is, because look, because there are all sorts of, there's all sorts of discussion. There are all sorts of attempted theologies. There are all sorts of replies to the basic argument that theologians have given down the centuries. So to make that point stick, you have to block off the escape routes. So it's a bit like if you're hunting rabbits with a ferret, you have to block off the escape routes. You have to block the minor tunnels of the rabbit warren before you put the ferret down the main tunnel, right? Otherwise, your rabbits will escape. And refuting an interesting philosophical theory is like that. So So an essay of this sort, if you're in the business of showing why some theory doesn't quite work, wants to have this kind of structure. You say, look, my essay is going to say this. My essay is going to explain to you that philosopher X's theory falls to some objection P. P for proposition, right? So obviously the first thing you do is lay out X's theory, and you lay out the objection. Well, then you have to think, what's the possible escape route? So the next paragraph, you might think that philosopher X can escape from objection P by making these moves or making this small adjustment. But no, I'm going to show you that that doesn't work. Well, what about some other possible route? Well, if you're an ingenious defender of philosopher X's theory, or if X was here today, what would they say in reply to objection P, right? You have to ask that question. What would, if some great dead philosopher, if you're beating them up, if you're having a go at their theory, what would they say if they were here today? Well, they might try and escape like this, but no, because I've already thought of that and filled in that tunnel. So you do enough of that, and that shows you that will hopefully show that there's no escape, that your objection really is fatal. Then you ask yourself, well, can any part of the theory be salvaged? Because, an interesting philosophical theory will be insightful, even if it doesn't turn out to be true, right? That somebody said that the great philosophical systems are all instructive failures. And the trick is to get the instruction without sharing in the failure, right? So you always have to it's not enough just to go, that shows this theory is false. Yeah, you want to be a bit more generous and say, well, okay, what did we learn from all this? What did this whole dialectic reveal? So that's a structure, and that way your 1 point gets developed, right? Something about this. So, well, first of all, you need to. This is one of the points at which sympathetic imagination is important in philosophical writing, because you need to be able to ask yourself, well, supposing great dead philosopher X were here, what would they say? And you need to imagine sympathetically, sort of give it as positive a spin as you can. So it's not just about logic, it's about asking yourself, well, what would this living, breathing person say if they were here and they could hear my objection to their theory? The other thing to notice is that if you do it this way, you will say all the same things as you say in the journalism report, right? All of the same points that you would have made in this kind of non-committal journalism report will also come up in the rabbit hunting refutation. It's just that they won't just be a list anymore. They will appear, they will naturally come up as you work your way through the business of blocking off the various escape routes. Right? So that rather than just having two lists, for and against, you have this naturally occurring structure. Okay. Then what do? You've written your critical essay. You've had a good old go at philosopher X's theory. You've asked yourself, can the theory be rescued in any way? You've considered the escape routes. You've convinced yourself that no, your big point is, it's a big point because the escape routes from it don't work. That's how you can tell what the big points are. What do you do then? You go back to the library. Here is somebody defeating a straw man. You may have heard of the straw man fallacy. The straw man fallacy is where you have a logical victory over some inanimate object that was only set up in order to be knocked down. So you need to make sure of a couple of things. You need to make sure that you are reading Philosopher X correctly, that your objection really does strike against what that theory really is, rather than, your possibly erroneous understanding of it. So you don't want to commit the straw man fallacy by accident, right? You don't want to get hold of a rough and ready version of Great Dead Philosopher X's theory and beat that up. So you need to make sure, you need to check that you haven't done that. So you need to go back to the books, back to the reading, and make sure that you've got your target right. But also, if this is a canonical philosopher, if this is, your Kant or your Descartes or your Plato or your Aristotle, people have been writing about them for centuries. So it's quite likely that your bright idea, your critical notion, has already occurred to somebody. So one of the things you're doing is looking in the literature, looking in the existing writing to see whether anybody has made a similar objection to you, and see how it went, right? Maybe somebody had a great point about Plato and wrote it down, and then all the Platonists rushed around and, had their say. Maybe the dialectic of your essay has already been played out in the literature. If it has, you would want to know that. Because you can think, oh, okay, well, all right, that's all been done. What next? Where does that leave us? Right? So, and I say this because people very often have this research then writing model, right? You get this from in the sciences too. I'll do the research and then I'll write it up. I'll do the reading and then I'll write. It's not that simple. You do some reading, you do some writing, you worry about whether your writing is getting the target right, and whether what you're writing has already been played out in the literature. So you go back, do more reading, right, and you go between the reading and the writing, and that kind of cycle. It's another of those cycles where you have to kind of jog backwards and forwards. There's an expression, and reflective equilibrium is where you've gone round one of these cycles between the reading and the writing, or between what you want to say and what you feel you're able to prove, and reached a point of stability. So that's how you know your essay's finished, right? That your trips round that cycle between the reading and the writing has got shorter and shorter. Okay. So the last thing I want to say is the first paragraph. The first paragraph is where you make your first impression. Whoever reads your essay will, have feelings about it as soon as they read the first paragraph. So when do you write it? Obviously, you write your first paragraph last. I mean, you have to write something. Something has to be your first paragraph, your first go at a first paragraph. But then you write your essay, and then you realize that you've written one of these or maybe one of those, and so you have to rewrite it to get through all this stuff, to get yourself into this condition. Then you can write a first paragraph that actually tells the reader what the essay does. And you can always tell, because people who've written their first paragraph at the end of the writing process very often write it in the present tense. This essay does this, this essay does that. Whereas if the essay really hasn't happened yet, it gets written in the future tense. This essay will answer the question, I hope, kind of thing. Now, where do you learn to write a good quality first paragraph? Well, remember what I said at the start? That for academic journals, quite often the The paper itself, the article itself is paywalled, but the abstract never is, because it's the abstract that will persuade you to buy the journal article, right? So you've got the whole world of academic journal article abstracts is available to you for you to look at. So do it. Have a look at the kinds of abstracts that academics write for journal articles and use those as your models for the first paragraph of your essay. I mean, I've given you one of my own as an example here, but it's maybe, well, it's certainly not the best example, but it'll do. You can, I won't spend time on it. You've been listening to me for just over 40 minutes anyway. So I think I'll leave it there.